When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite. Looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Warning, creators of this game do understand the subject matter may be offensive to some, but they do honor the families and people that have been affected by these real-life tragedies that these individuals have caused. Want to play a game?
Oh, yeah!
Lover of true crime?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, we got an interesting game for you to check out.
Wow.
With the mashup of influences such as horror movies, collecting cards, and RPGs.
What?
Led to giving birth to an incredible creation of this game, Killers, the card game.
You are all I killed with now.
This game is a collectible trading card game featuring some of the most infamous killers, with tidbits of trivia on the back of each card to help you learn some insight to each criminal.
Who the hell are you?
Let's not forget, during the game, cops will be chasing you and these criminals.
I'm a cop, you idiot!
However, check out their website listed through all social media today, which can be found under Killers, the card game.
Am I on the internet?
I want to play a game.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today.
What does everybody want?
I'm former WWE superstar Al Snow, and you're listening to Crazy Train Radio.
What does everybody need? What does everybody love? Let's get ready to rumble!
Well, I did part of the intro beforehand, but ladies and gentlemen, we are going to do another old school wrestling panel. But this time, to give credit where credit is due, Mr. Brian Young from the Transatlantic Ramblings Podcast, which I will put links to for the Spotify and all that fun stuff. This was his idea when we were chatting about some other stuff going on my end last week. And he said, I got this idea, which anything Brian presents to me, we're running with it. I trust Brian. He's got a brain full of knowledge under that wet hair. And especially wrestling wise and just anything, I trust Brian. So first, Brian, how are you?
I am fantastic, and thank you for allowing me to come on this and let my inner nerd flag fly. Nerd! because as much as I love you all out there listening, this show is just as much for me as it is for you, because this is a dream of mine to have guys like this debate this topic.
Since this was your baby, why don't we go ahead and let you introduce the idea and introduce the three panelists with us?
All right.
Hey, that's my job, the sound effects, Mr. In Post.
Ladies and gentlemen, in honor of my first initial being B, Brian, the greatest letter of the alphabet, I had this wonderful idea. In the television era of pro wrestling, with the three major bodies, the NWA, the AWA, and the WWF, yeah, we're going old school, folks, of the champions, which was the best B? And representing, and I'm not going in any favoritism order, I'm doing it in order, they're on my screen here.
Oh, hell no!
Yeah, well, you know.
Okay.
In the corner of the NWA and Jack Brisco is Rodney West, son of the legendary referee, promoter, booker, all around in knowledge of the wrestling game, born and raised in it, Ron West's son. And since his brother's not here, I'll say Ron West, good-looking son.
That is correct.
And he will be defending Jack Brisco, Mr. Rodney West of the Pro Wrestling Inside and Out podcast. Rodney, how are you, my friend?
Thank you so very much. Thank you for letting me be here. It's an honor to be here. And to be full disclosure, I am huge fans of Bruno Sammartino and huge fan of Nick Bockwinkel. So it's going to be difficult, but I can hold my own.
See that? See, guys, he's calling you out already. Well, you might have come up against the toughest competition of your life.
No doubt.
Because in this corner, this is a guy, folks, when I was writing my book, I referenced his book so much and said, if my book can be 1/3 or 1/100th as good as his books, I will be happy with the outcome. This is not only a historian, one of the great historians and archivists of the pro wrestling business, but probably the single greatest mind of AWA wrestling in the world. The author of, there's so many books.
There's 4 titles at least, right, sir?
Yeah, the AWA record book of the 1960s. A 2-volume set of the AWA record book of the 70s, which he co-wrote with Mark James, I believe. Mark James, you did those with, right?
Right. Mark James published them. I did all the work in.
And for
Mark
any
James,
wrestling fan,
can I mention real quick, since you mentioned Mark's name? Mark James is credited. He's a wrestling historian out of Memphis, does a lot of work on Memphis wrestling. Go ahead.
Absolutely one of the best at Memphis wrestling. Yes.
but the quintessential book of George's, and I think of the wrestling business as a whole, might be the book that he wrote on the golden age of wrestling, of AWA wrestling, from Vern Gagne to the Road Warriors. It's the full title is The Golden Age of Minnesota Wrestling.
Minnesota's Golden Age of Wrestling.
I got the book right here, and I'm trying not to look at it because, I'm looking at the camera. It's one of my favorite books ever on the topic of wrestling. And this is one of my favorite guys, one of the nicest guys, one of the most knowledgeable guys. And he's going to be a tough opponent for you guys, Mr. George Schire. George, welcome to the show. He will be defending the AWA and the legendary Nick Bockwinkel of B. Bockwinkel.
We're not worthy.
How are you?
I'm so good, and I was excited when you came out with this debate idea, or just I look at more of a conversation, because none of us are going to be right or wrong. This is going to be fun. But I do want to clarify something, because I love Mark James. He's a great, great guy, and I just want to make it clear that all the great books that he wrote, and he does, and he's got so many of them out there, and go get them. They're great. But with my AWA record books, Mark only published them. And he did the layout for the covers that I designed for him. But the contents of those books are 100% mine. And I just like that to be sure, because Mark, I think by his own admission, doesn't know the AWA. So he's a good guy. He just published my books. And then just Minnesota's Golden Age. The only reason it's called Minnesota is because it was published by the Minnesota Historical Society Press, the Minnesota Historical Society here in St. Paul, Minnesota. And they wanted Minnesota in the name, but it is the AWA history. And that's how that came about. So I like to clarify that too.
And Brian, if I can, I know we'll get there with the debate. There was some crossover towards the end of the AWA and Memphis, so it's only fitting that there's. So it's only fitting that you two, he helped you out with the book. So
right,
Brian,
and ladies and gentlemen, representing the evil empire, this man is not only an actor, a writer, a model. I mean, look at him. Come on, look at that profile, folks. That's a model right there.
Oh, boy.
Thank you, Brian.
Manager of the legendary Nikolai Volkov. Historian of the WWF. His photographic memory of that organization is mind-blowing. And he will be defending what a lot of people, especially the Northeast where I'm from, consider the greatest performer of all time. B for Bruno Sammartino. So Rodney with Jack Brisco NWA, George, Nick Bockwinkel AWA, Nikita, Bruno Sammartino WWF. Nikita, how are you? And welcome to the show.
I am so happy. I can only extend. It's my good friend Jonathan, my good friend Brian. I've been on a show with Rodney before. It was a great time. George, it's good to meet you. This is wonderful. There will be no arguing. I've always taken a vow. I'll never fight about wrestling. We love it, but the people listening in, they're going to be treated to not only history, but passion.
And that's why I wanted to point out, we're not debating. We are having a spirited discussion.
Yes.
And doesn't mean any of us are right or wrong. We're just hoping when you walk away after listening and watching this that you'll say, wow, that was fun.
And it's not like the debates I have with my wife. I mean, those are full-blown arguments. This will just be discussion.
I hope you all walk away going, wow, I want to look into these three guys more, and I want to find as much footage of these three guys as possible and watch it, as in the title of Nikita's book, When It Was Real.
And like Nikita said, we are not going to walk away debating our spouses or sleeping on the couch tonight. So,
well, you guys don't want to fight, but you're in with a West. You're with a Southern boy. You're with a Georgia boy who might want to throw down with you guys. You know that Georgia territory is rough.
So, Mr. Young, since this was your baby, and I know you were telling us before we hit the little red button, would you like to explain how we are going to handle things?
How we are going to handle things is semi-typical debate style. Each of our three special guests are going to get 5 minutes to make the case for why their wrestler was the greatest of the television era. After those 5 minutes, it's going to open up to each other's questions and Jonathan and myself asking questions, so that by the end of this, maybe we can come to an agreement of who the greatest was, or maybe we'll just all agree they were all the greatest. Side note, when I told my older brother, the biggest wrestling fan I ever knew in my life, that I was doing this debate with the three Bs, Nikita, you're going to love this, without skipping a beat, and I said, I got Rodney West, we're going to talk about Jack Brisco, and I got George Schire, we're going to talk about Nick Bockwinkel, and I got Nikita Breznikov, we're going to talk about Bruno Sammartino, and he says, what about Bob Backlund?
Very good, very good.
So I have here 3 slips of paper listed 1, 2, and 3. Your names are on here. So to decide who's going to get to go first for their 5 minutes, and Jonathan, you have the timer, right?
I can on my phone.
I'll have the timer. I'm also going to have you pick the first number. Pick a number between 1 and 3.
17. No. Let's go. Yeah. Let's go number 2.
Number 2. Coming up first, your 5 minutes, Mr. George Schire. You have 5 minutes to tell us why Nick Bockwinkel of the AWA was the greatest television era champion. Tell him when to go.
Go.
All right, Nick Bockwinkel. Kids, you got to understand something. Here was a guy who not only was born into the business, his daddy, Warren Bockwinkel, great heavyweight champion in the 40s into the 50s, and he trained young Nicky Bockwinkel, as he was called, in the 50s when he debuted in 1954. And Nick had the greatest trainers in the world. Along with his dad, he had Wilbur Snyder, who was about 10 years older, and he had the legendary Lou Thez, who, when people talk about real wrestling, you don't have Lou Thez on your list, throw the list away. It's worthless. Now, Nick Bockwinkel, television presence. In the 70s, that's when television started to go to color all around the country. And if you had one guy who could stand in front of the camera and was as articulate and as immaculate in his speech and conversation, no one, and I mean no one, could do it better than Sir Nicholas of Bockwinkel. He could get out there, throw out the big $50, $100 words. Legend has it that people would run for dictionaries when he was doing his interview because he'd throw out 3 or 4 words and you had no idea what they were. But here's the thing about Nick. He was a consummate representative of the AWA in that his presence was professional. He always wore a suit outside the ring. He believed what Lou Thez did, that if you were the champion, you should look the part. You should represent the title with dignity and hold that belt proud. When he got on the air, there was never a time you could stump Nick Bockwinkel. You could throw a question at him and he could run with it. And this was in the era when interviews, folks, were not 3, 4, 5, 10, 15-page scripts that you had to remember. This is when Nick and all his fellow cohorts had to go out there and go for 2 or 3 minutes with a question or a comment made to them, and they take it from there, telling you who their opponent is, what they're going to do to their opponent, why they hate their opponent, and what they're going to do after the match is over. And Nick could do it, as I said, better than any of the other 2 that we're going to be discussing today. Nick Bockwinkel represented the AWA because Vern Gagne, who, as we all know, represented, if you really want to talk television era, he was on the national Dumont network when television was national in the advent of television era in the early 50s. And Nick Bockwinkel was his successor, chosen by Vern Gagne because he trusted Nick Bockwinkel. And Nick Bockwinkel was a company guy. He worked for Vern. He did what Vern asked. And he would travel 200 dates a year, defending the title, doing whatever Vern asked. And Vern knew that he had the greatest representative for his promotion. And then he put Bobby Heenan, with him as a manager. And then you had the consummate duel that if you hated them, you wanted to see them beat. But the bottom line was Nick was a wrestler. He knew how to wrestle. We're talking technical wrestling now, and he could brawl with the best of them. And his matches with guys like Billy Robinson, Vern Gagne, Jeff Ports, oh my gosh, they were wrestling matches, and they could work 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it was. And Nick could carry any opponent he needed to make that opponent look even better than he was, because that was the job as the champion, to make the challenger look like he was going to be able to win the title that night. And Nick could do that. As far as I'm concerned, I never saw anybody better on the microphone than Nick Bockwinkel. And I said, when you put Bobby Heenan with him, you had the biggest mouth, the most charismatic character as a manager. But Nick and him, normally you don't have a manager with a guy like Nick Bockwinkel who had the gift of gab, but they just were the right combination. And the combination worked because, Bobby saved the title a few times, but that was his job. And as we got all done, fans walked away. Nick Bockwinkel was the AWA heavyweight champion of the world.
All right. Okay. That's setting the stage, folks.
It was.
And that's the tip of the iceberg.
And as you can tell, people won't see this, Brian, but as soon as he started his argument, I went and got And yes, people, this is what I have in my hand is pen and paper. I was taking notes to add to my questions when we get to that part of the debate. So,
all right, Jonathan, if you would pick a number, 1 or 3.
Let's go number 1.
Well, that's me, number 1, obviously.
Well, yeah, there you go.
But Nikita, the evil empire, you are going to have 5 minutes to make your case for Bruno Sammartino.
If I can, before Nikita starts his 5 minutes, I have to say I was impressed that you did your argument on Nick Bockwinkel in 4 minutes and 30 seconds. He didn't use his whole time, folks. But.
Yeah. And with no notes, folks, that was a great historian saying, I know this stuff. Nick's my man. I'm going to prove it.
Okay.
Well, Nick spent time at my house and we were good buddies. That's fact.
So, Nikita, you are going to start as of now.
How can you argue with a man that truly had a broken neck? It was not a gimmick. It was not a work, and came back 2 months to the day to wrestle. Bruno Sammartino was, and stealing from the Iron Sheik, the real deal. You could look at that man when he was in street clothes and say, he's a gorilla. Look at the hands. He could kill you if he wanted to. If he punched you, he would drive your nose through your brain. He was just that incredible, but he was perfectly sized because as a hero champion, Bruno was 5'10" with lifts, okay? He was not a tall man, but it was great. When he faced Killer Kowalski or Nikolai Volkov or Spiros Arion, he had to overcome this evil SOB, and he could do it. But to go what George was talking about with the interviews, yeah, Vince McMahon would start in the morning before the TV tapings, and when Bruno was champion, Baltimore, Boston, Philadelphia, they would just run them off for 4-week intervals. When Bruno spoke, he wasn't flamboyant, but he was from the heart, and he touched so many people for so long that I think that even today, if you cross the wrong person and badmouth Bruno, you're going to get a punch in the mouth without a doubt. Let me tell you, we loved that man because when he walked down the aisle with no music, no pyrotechnics, just Bruno coming down the aisle, the place would erupt. Now, George, you knew Larry Zbyszko. Rodney, you knew Larry Zbyszko in your areas. How can a guy like Larry Zbyszko, and I love Larry, no, I'm not knocking him, but Bruno took him and they sold out buildings. Even though you knew if Bruno got pissed enough, he'd break Larry in 6 pieces. But they ran a beautiful program with it, especially with him turning on Bruno. It was absolutely, people call it the best angle of all times. I think it was Spiros Arion, because when Spiros Arion turned on Bruno, everybody here knows Evan Ginsberg. Evan Ginsberg's father was a cab driver. He said all of the cabbies in New York stopped, parked. They went into the building to Madison Square Garden to watch the match between Bruno and Arion. People, New York, New York. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And Bruno sold that building out just with his name alone. But his ability, and he went Boston, Baltimore. Oh, my God, Lou Albano. Put Bruno like they did in Baltimore on August 16, 1975. Just a bullshit match. There was no angle leading up to it. It's just Bruno was sick of Lou Albano. Throw him to the Lions. And give Lou credit. He sold blood all over the place. It was great. But Bruno was a man's man, and women loved him. Look, when Bruno wrestled Waldo Von Erich, June 16th, 1975, go back, look it up on YouTube. They're throwing roses to him. Somebody presents a bouquet of roses. He was loved by the fans because he represented us. And I see Bruno did come from hardship. He was stuck in the mountains in Italy when the Germans were occupying it. So naturally, you put Bruno in there with Waldo Von Erich, instant sellout. I mean, and Waldo, he could deliver like nobody. And he believed a lot of that too, Nikolai used to tell me. He had a lot. That was his own property. Waldo loved that. So with those two together, you got dynamite. and you better watch out because there could be a riot. And there were some near riots that I watched when Bruno had to, if they were going to do 3-match series, Bruno had to sell for the guy and then maybe get a little color. And it's like, you made Bruno bleed. I hope you parked about a mile away from the building because people are going to be waiting when you come out. See, that's what Nikolai told me too. When they came as Mongols and they would have the matches with Bruno and Chief, that's when they had to say no more, put the main event on last because everybody's waiting outside to murder them because you did dirty things to Bruno. So it's like, okay, they had to mix it up a little bit. And Stan Hansen got, poor son of a gun, even though it happened by accident, and have great respect for him. But it was great. I mean, he broke Bruno's neck, but then it's like, okay, run with this, Stan. Just keep running with it. Then he beats Putski. Then it's like he's unstoppable. And then here comes Bruno from the hospital. They take pictures with him in the traction. And it's like, then he's in Shea Stadium. And it's like, man. Because, it was Muhammad Ali against, and the great Muhammad Ali, I must say, against, it was Inoki. And it's like, who the hell's Inoki? We didn't have cable back then. It didn't mean shit to anybody. Bruno against Stan Hansen was that, not pay-per-view, people, closed circuit. That's what it was, closed circuit, because they wanted to see Bruno come back and beat the hell out of Stan Hansen, and he didn't disappoint us. He never disappointed us. Even at the end, you know what? They brought Bruno in as a color man to do TV with Vince, starting on October 10th of 78, and the ratings went back up because Bruno could deliver it. It made sense. He was selling for people. He said, like, okay, this guy, people think maybe he didn't get hurt bad enough with that hold or hit that hard, but he's trying to fool his opponent to make him believe he's hurt when actually he's going to try to get the advantage. So it's like...
Already breaking the rules. Nikolai goes over.
Well, he used my 30 seconds.
He did.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you, George.
Yeah.
I owe you one.
See, that's passion.
So, yes. And I'm no judge in the game. I'm sitting back as a fan here. But from the host standpoint, I do want to acknowledge something that Nikita said during his 5 minutes there. And I was
5.5.
Oh, come on.
I was trying to be nice here. But
that's USA time, not Russia time.
Yeah, but
I get 30 seconds at the end of the program.
Yeah, absolutely. But I can say I can't speak for Rodney or George, but as a host standpoint, I was fortunate enough to be able to talk to Bruno a couple of times on the phone. Had him on early on with doing what I do, and Nikita mentioned about him being a man's man. I will also say, with my experience in talking to Bruno, and thank God, or whoever you want to thank, that I had that opportunity. But in my short dealings with Bruno, he was not only a man's man, but he was a gentleman that if he told you something, which I'm old school, but if he said something to you, his word was his bond. And I appreciated that in my dealings with Bruno. So.
Yeah.
Very good, Jonathan.
Legendary guy. Now.
I think we have a bought-off referee.
Yeah. Well, he's not judging, so.
No. It's going to cost more than a shot of whiskey, but go ahead.
Hey, we could talk about Nick as the man too. We'll do that.
Yes, we'll be getting into this because I never met Nick, so I can't speak to. But I've only heard good things about the man.
Well, now coming up, in my opinion, when I came up with this, I said the third one is going to be the toughest one to make the case for, only because Bockwinkel was champion in a face for so long. Bruno was a champion in New York in a face for so long. This man had a much shorter run as champion by his own accord. He voluntarily did that.
Yeah.
But he was so gifted and such a great worker that I wanted him to be into this argument. And I said, who can I get that will be willing to go up against these two heavyweights with two legendary wrestlers and not cower, but actually be a man and stand up and say, I will take it. And the only person I could think of was Rodney West. So representing the NWA and Jack Brisco is the one and only Rodney West. And Jonathan, Nikita.
Wait a minute, which number is he?
He's 3.
Okay, very good.
He's just got to check Brian.
Yeah.
Mr. West, your time starts now.
We've discussed the villain world champion. We've discussed the hero world champion, and now it's time to introduce you to the athlete world champion, the man that had been 3 times state champion in high school, 2-time NCAA champion, and 2-time Big Ten champion, or Big A champion. This is Jack Brisco, a tremendous athlete, a gifted athlete, lettered in every in football and in track and in wrestling, a true natural athlete, if there ever has been one. I had an opportunity to watch Gordon Soley do This Is Your Life, Jack Brisco, in which they dedicated an entire hour of championship wrestling from Florida, building up Jack Brisco to become the world champion. And that was exactly what he was. He wasn't just gifted. This was years and years of building. Jack began wrestling in 1965 and wasn't champion until 1974. And he went through and trained with the best. He worked with Leroy McGurk, of course, was his trainer. And then meeting the man, I think that really sealed his future, and that was Eddie Graham. Eddie Graham taught him the figure 4 leg lock, which, of course, Mr. Bockwinkel used as well. And then Jack became the world champion, and as far in beating Harley Race. Now, many would say that that Dory Funk refused to drop the title to Jack Brisco. That is totally and completely untrue. If Dory was asked to drop the title, he would do it. He is a professional and always was a professional. The fact of the matter is that back in those days, normally the champion did not, the one that was chasing after the title, normally did not beat that champion. Another person, such as Harley Race, would come along. They would beat the champion, and then later on down the road, then that one that's been in the chase, like Jack Brisco, has been chasing Dory Funk all over the place, beats Harley Race. So at that point, then you had matches that you had between Harley Race and Jack Brisco, and then you had Dory Funk and Jack Brisco, drawing houses everywhere. And like I said, he was the first, or as I've said before, Bockwinkel was your villain champion, Bruno was your hero champion. Jack faced them all. Where the girl, whoever you are. I don't care if you were Buddy Colt in Florida, if you were Jerry Lawler in Tennessee, or if you were Bob Armstrong in Mr. Wrestling 2, in which, by the way, Jack Brisco in Wrestling 2 almost caused a riot when Jack Brisco beat 2 by 2 having him in a Japanese armbar. 2 was leaning way back and had Brisco pinned. The referee count 1, 2. Brisco raised his shoulder, and the referee counted 2 shoulder out. The Omni almost rioted just over that. Jack Brisco, if you watched a match of his, it was always something different every single time. And these were holds. He had a fiery side, of course, but he also used holds. And no one questioned the ability of Jack Brisco, no matter where you went. It didn't matter if he went to Florida. He was the Florida champion. If he went to work for the Jim Crockett promotion, he was the Eastern States champion. He was the Missouri State heavyweight champion, or junior heavyweight champion for Leroy McGurk. Every promoter he worked for believed in Jack Brisco. Of course, no more than Eddie Graham. And of course, as we all know, Jack, in the end, it was just too much for him. The travel 300 days a year, was really too much. And of course, I think in the meantime, he had a divorce, and he just said, he went to the promoters, he went to Eddie and said, I just can't do this anymore, and willingly dropped the title to Terry Funk. This didn't end his career. Just like Terry Funk, when he lost the title, it just was really the beginning. And after that, Jack went back to Florida. He started his own business, a body shop. And also, Jack was a part owner of Georgia Championship Wrestling, and we will not hold that against him for selling to Vince McMahon. But anyway, that's the life of Jack Brisco. No matter where you went, I just watched the match, and I know that Bockwinkel went to Memphis as well. Lawler and Jack Brisco sold out 10,183 people to watch Jack Brisco versus Jerry Lawler, and that match was a wrestling match. Tremendous match. Lawler ends up winning that match by cheating, and of course he got caught with the foreign object, and of course Jack Brisco wins. Tremendous wrestler, and there will never be another Jack Brisco. In fact, like I said, he's the last of the hero world champions for the National Wrestling Alliance.
Thank you, sir, for that lovely debate. And
can I give you a little piece about Brisco?
Sure.
He would appear in Madison Square Garden as a guest appearance, and a few times in 1972 in Boston. So he was legendary, and his talent was well known by Vince Sr., by Phil Zacco and Willie Gilzenberg and the rest of the Capital Wrestling Group. So they would bring in Jack Brisco to do guest appearances.
I've noticed that he also teamed with Gorilla Monsoon a few times, I believe, in Washington, D.C. Yes. My understanding is that the Florida Championship Wrestling from Florida played in New York. Am I right?
Yes, it did. They were fortunate enough to have that cable. That's what got Dusty over, because he never made a TV appearance before he wrestled Superstar September the 26th of 77. I was like, who's Dusty Rhodes? If you didn't have cable like we did in Baltimore, you saw him from the magazines. But that's what got him over. Florida Championship Wrestling was shown in New York, so it was able to sell the Garden out.
All right, now we've got the 3 cases made. Fantastic job on all 3. What we're going to do now is we're going to open up. Me and Jonathan are going to be allowed to ask our questions to each of you individually, and you'll all be able to weigh in on the answers for each other's person too, but we will direct questions to someone in particular to start it. Jonathan, do you mind if I go first?
Oh, I didn't know you wanted to get involved with the discussion, Mr. Helper.
You can, sir, as I'm pulling up my notes.
All right. My first question. First of all, I loved that Rodney pointed out that Bockwinkel was the great heel champion, Bruno the great hero champion, Brisco the great technical champion. But I want to ask my first question to Mr. George Schire, that people can, especially now looking back in history, label Bockwinkel as a great heel champion. Do you think that is fair? Because I think Bockwinkel was a great technical worker. And folks, you can find a match. It's on YouTube now in the Sam Houston Coliseum of Nick Bockwinkel versus Tito Santana. That's like a 50-minute match that is just unbelievable. Do you think history treats Bockwinkel fairly based on his skill? Because they never seem to mention that when they talk about him anymore.
Well, I think the best way to answer your question is you have to remember that Nick Bockwinkel, before he won Vern Gagne's title, the AWA title, in November 8th of 1975 in St. Paul, Nick had spent 5 years in the AWA at that point. And he came to the AWA with the promise Vern wanted to put the title on. And that was his heir apparent when Vern decided he was going to start slowing down. Now, the reason Vern picked Nick Bockwinkel was because when Nick started wrestling in 1954, he spent about the first 15 years of his career traveling the country. You name the territories, and Nick worked there. He wasn't always in the main events, but he was champion in various territories. Pacific Northwest, had some titles in Texas, but he was the guy that earned his craft as a babyface. Let's remember that he was, in the beginning, he was young Nicky Bockwinkel. And whenever he'd go into a town, he was the hero on the crowd, whoever he wrestled against. So Nick knew how to be the greatest babyface. It wasn't until 1969, the end of 1968, when he went into Atlanta and he decided to start his career as a heel. And for that year in Georgia, he won the Georgia state title, the championship, had a great feud with Dory Funk Jr., who was the champion at the time. And he became a heel and got those hormones going to tick people off. And then Vern brought him in. And Nick had a way. He was the greatest heel champion because he didn't yell, he didn't shout, he didn't scream, he didn't spit on the announcer's bow tie or tie. He literally just went out there soft-spoken, insulted the fans by calling them cretinous humanoids and 8 to 5 Bobby Sock, White Sock lifers, and doing it with no yelling or screaming. But the main thing is that when he talked, that old E.F. Hutton, he talks, you listen. Well, that was Nick. And when his interview, he just made you want to hate him. But the irony of it is that as unpopular as he was, he also was very popular with a lot of AWA fans. They cheered him because they knew he was real. And, when you talk about a technical wrestler, I look at it this way. I bet you I saw Nick Bockwinkel wrestle Billy Robinson. They wrestled hundreds of times over the course of 10 years. But I think I probably saw him wrestle 150 times. And then how many times in tag matches? And here's the deal with Nick. He could go toe-to-toe with Billy Robinson. And if you can go toe-to-toe with Billy Robinson, who by all accounts, guys, is better than any of the 3 wrestlers we're talking about here tonight. But Billy was a stubborn old son of a gun who believed he kept it real. He was real. You didn't work with him and he didn't like you. He was going to make your life ugly in the ring, and wrestlers will tell you that. And so Nick knew how to do it with Billy. And I asked Nick one time, I said, how is it that everybody didn't want to wrestle Nick, or wrestle Billy, but you could do it? He said, I'd go into the locker room the night of our match. And he says, well, William, what do you want to do tonight? And he said, hey, with that, you've got Billy's respect. Now, here's the thing. Nick and Billy could make every match I ever saw different. And I'm serious on that. How can you wrestle all those times and not have the same routine, the same bumps, the same hits, the ropes, whatever it might be? And Nick and Billy were able to do that. Nick made Billy look good, and Billy made Nick look good. But the other side of it is we have to remember that by the time Vern Gagne was in his 50s, Billy, and he wasn't the whirlwind that he'd been 5 or 10 or 15 years ago, because Vern Gagne was the real deal. Nick could carry Vern too and make him look better than he was at his 5 or 10 years older that he was. So Nick had that ability. And I will give credit to the NWA champion, and Brisco is among them. Their job was to go into a town and work heel or baby, depending on who the challenger was, and make that challenger believable, no matter who it was, better than they were. And when they left, the fans believed the challenger should have won. That was the NWA champion's job, but Nick carried that really well for the AWA. He was just a technical guy. So when you put him with Billy, you got a brawl, but you got a psychology match. When you put him against Ray Stevens, a heel in his own right, or Jack Lanza, Nick could be the babyface in a subtle way. And I saw Nick wrestle Sheik Adnan El Casey. I saw 4 matches. I'll tell you what, Nick was the babyface even though he was a heel. But he could turn the fans around because they didn't want Adnan, I'm going to take the title back to Iraq and no one's ever going to have a title match again. That routine worked good in wrestling. So Nick was America. There wasn't, in my time of watching wrestling for champions, I think Nick Bockwinkel, of all the 3 that we're talking about, and with but the exception of Harley Race, I don't think there was a better representative as a world champion than Nick Bockwinkel.
Oh, I didn't know you wanted to get involved with the discussion, Mr. Helper.
And Nikita, nothing against Bruno, because I loved Bruno, but I think the appeal that he had was so much, it was more biased because of the East Coast wrestling magazines. Every fan who saw a cover saw Bruno. And so Bruno had a little bit of an edge there as far as popularity. But I will never argue with what he could draw in the Northeast. Because,
but George, if he couldn't deliver, he would have died on the vine.
I agree with you. But I guess I would ask this question. would Bruno have been able to leave the East Coast in 1964, 5, 6, or 7 and not wrestle in the East Coast exclusively for a long, maybe ever again? Would he have been as much of a draw in any other territory? That's a what-if question, but I don't think so. I don't think so.
That's a tough question. How would we know?
I don't think so. But I will throw this out. Our Crusher, the Crusher, I don't think he could have went to New York and been as over as he was in the AWA as for as long a time as Bruno was. So I think a lot of it has territorial boundaries to it. Bruno had the right audience.
Now, Dick the Bruiser and Bruno, of course, were close. And I'm grateful to Dick the Bruiser because he helped develop the Valiant Brothers for the world.
Yeah.
Through Bobby Heenan. So that was wonderful. But see, when Bruno was running his own little thing in Pittsburgh, still kind of affiliated with Capital Wrestling, but he was doing his own thing. That's when Dick the Bruiser would come in from Chicago and they would be tag team. And of course, Bruno going to Indianapolis, champions with Dick the Bruiser. Now, see, they were over there, George. You know, Bruno was tag champions with Dick the Bruiser. I mean, because when it happened, when they took the belt off of Pedro, the gates were dying, and it's like Bruno's like, okay, I guess I'll come, because Vinny Jr. and Sr. were chasing Bruno all over the place. It's like, we need you back. And Bruno's like, well, I'm tag champions in Indianapolis. I'm happy. And it's like, no, we need you back in the Northeast. So he did both for like 3 months until the schedules evened out, because they kept dropping the belts back and forth to the Valiants. And it was like, he could make it there. He did make it there.
That's such a great question that Bruno had that advantage of the magazines. George is absolutely right. Nick had the advantage of being in the right television market because the AWA went to so many parts of the country. Brisco had the advantage of going everywhere and being known everywhere when he was champ. So there's pros and cons to each of them.
I'd like to point out, when you talk about this travel thing and going places, and I know Bruno wrestled in Japan, and I know he wrestled in Australia, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. But when you look at Brisco, you look at Bockwinkel, and then you look at any of the guys that were associated with each of them, they probably did more traveling than Bruno overall.
Yes, agreed.
Brisco, obviously, the NWA, they had such a unique formula with their champion. He basically was a champion, and he traveled, Australia tonight and Memphis the next night, and then in Honolulu or whatever. It was so goofy. And, you talked about the schedule. After 2 or 3 years, most of the NWA champions just walked into the office and said, here, I can't take it anymore. My kids don't know me. They grew up and I didn't know I had kids. I mean, I'm being facetious, but.
Well, no, it's true. No, it's absolutely true.
There's a guy like Nick Bockwinkel who told me, he says, I'm going to do the math. He said, Fritz von Erich got together with me. And Nick told me this right on my patio out here, 1996. He says, Fritz von Erich gets together with me and a couple of the other NWA promoters. They wanted me to be the NWA champion. And Nick says, it didn't take me a few minutes just to sit down and do a little bit of math. He says, I looked at what Harley Race was doing. Harley Race was literally wrestling 375 days a year. And you go, hold it a minute. There's only 365 days in a year. Well, we know there were some double shots, matinees, nights, etc. And Harley was all over here, there, and everywhere. And that was the same for Jack Brisco. It was the same for Gene Kaniski and Terry Funk and Dory Funk. And that's what wore those guys out. It was the travel. And so Nick said, I do the math. I sit down and I say, I work with Vern. And when all's said and done, he says, I'm wrestling only 6 months out of the year. I don't have 6 months off. But with the way the schedule goes, he says, I'm working 6 months out of the year. Now, this is in 96, guys. And Nick says, and I'm making $200,000 a year. And he says, and then I look at what Harley's making, and Harley's making $200,000 a year. Now, this was Nick talking. Whether these figures are accurate, I don't know. But he says Harley's making $200,000, and he's working double, triple the schedule that I. So why would I want to be NWA champion?
All right, Jonathan, you have the next question. Who you get? Which wrestlers are being geared towards, and which guest is it going to?
Wow. Well, first of all, there's a lot to be said there.
Oh yeah.
But George kind of beat me to the punch as far as the question I was going to start off with, and that being as far as these gentlemen working, if flip-flopping, I should say, in terms of, because Bruno, there's a rumor, or I shouldn't say rumor, there's a theory out there that Bruno was just the Northeast champion, and rightfully so. And obviously George just mentioned about from a money standpoint with Nick Bockwinkel. And if I can only work half a year and make the same amount of money, I get that. But what my question was if Bruno worked the AWA schedule, or, you know what I mean, you put one of the three gentlemen that we're talking about into the other territory, per se, would they have been as successful? And I guess I should say, Brian, because the way you put that, my question will be started with Nikita. So, do you think if Bruno worked, because obviously Bruno had in the Northeast, and I'm a little biased because I'm from the Northeast, as Nikita knows, you know, he had the Italian audience. So obviously you hear stories of Bruno, if he went to Houston and he went here, went there, it might not have gotten over as much. So we'll start with Nikita on that one.
I'm going to jump on with one of the things George says, who our fans out there understand. When you talk about traveling, back then you paid your own expenses. The company didn't cover your flights or your driving or your hotels. That was your pocket that was coming out of. So that's a tough one. And I salute
Still
the
to
guys.
this day, Nikita, they only cover the flights to big companies, but go ahead.
The flights, okay. But everything else, because most of the time you're driving. So it's like, that was a tough thing. Now, yeah, Bruno, when he left, Pedro had a problem, Pedro Morales, because they said, you know, the ethnic people, it was good for the Spanish audience in New York. That was great. But when he went up to Boston, it's like, it ain't working. When he went, Baltimore was okay. But see, Bobo Brazil owned Baltimore because in the spring or the summer of 73, Pedro wasn't drawing in Baltimore. Phil Zacco had the brains to tell Senior, I'm going to bring Bobo in, and he carried the summer. It worked. They got over. So your point could be taken. Would Bruno be as big in Houston? Would he be as big in Florida? He got over because he was Bruno Sammartino, WWF champion or former champion when he appeared there. But that's another question we'll never know the answer to. But ethnic-wise, he did touch the Italian, the Polish, any kind of ethnic people, I would believe, because with Bruno, when it came from the heart, you felt it. You got that this guy cared about you, because with his interviews, whoever said it earlier, it wasn't screaming or hollering about. It was Brisco, right, Rodney? He didn't have to scream and holler.
He did the athletes interview, you know, like you would see with football or basketball or something like that. But that was
Bruno would be like that. And in fact, a lot of times he said, well, you know, they come out screaming and hollering. I don't need to do that. I'll do my talking in the ring, Vince. And he looked at Bruno. His ears are all mashed together, cauliflower. His nose is all over his face. He's got scars. He's a wrestler. And you look at his hands, it's like they had big hands, but they were gnarled up from just being beat upon. So I don't know how he would have done in other areas. Ethnic-wise, I think it's a legitimate point. Yes, you have. Well, isn't that what wrestling is? You have to connect. Like I've said many times, you can't make anybody love you or hate you. Like a heel. How the hell is a heel going to get over? Today, everybody's offended. What the hell do you say to get over as a heel? I don't know. You can't even say your mother wears a combat boots. That would offend somebody, and they want to burn the TV building down. It's like, That's why it's
well.
dying.
If you offend too many people, you'll lose your sponsors, and then their TV's canceled nowadays.
Yeah, that's it. They'll boycott you, and it's like, I'm dead. So it's like, what the hell do you do? But back then, you could come out and say a couple of things, not going over the top, but then he's going to punch the guy in the mouth in the ring, and people will go home happy, and that was the end of it. Nobody got sued, and nobody got boycotted. But
back then, I could. I could just me. I could go out on WWF television and start running Bruno down, and by the time that I'm finished, the entire arena was just throwing stuff. Okay, and that's not because of my ability. That's because Bruno's over. Okay, and same thing. If you go to Minneapolis, you talk about Bockwinkel. If as long as you can back it up, you're going to get halfway over there. Same thing with.
Well, that's a good point, Rodney, because in Boston, they had to put plexiglass up because Freddie Blassie got hit in the eye with an egg and it cut his cornea because he was doing nasty shit to Bruno and everybody else. And it's like people were throwing too much. And it's like, okay, so we got to protect them as best we can. People were mad because they had to look like watching a hockey match. But how the hell are you going to watch wrestling through plexiglass? But they had to keep the guys safe, and that's what they did.
You raised a great point. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to ask just real quick. We were talking about Pedro and Bruno. I saw where at September the 9th, 1972, Pedro actually went against Bruno Shea Stadium. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Absolutely, yes.
How did that? I mean, we were talking about the two biggest stars. Normally, Bruno did not face babyface. He normally didn't. How did that draw?
Well, the draw was okay. The problem was it was a cold September night, and Roberto Clemente was playing. He was getting ready to go for his 3,000th hit. So a lot of people were sitting home trying to watch that. And so it was a little bit of a problem. But what happened was, and Bruno said this 1,000 times in different interviews, because he said, why people ask the question, why don't good guys wrestle each other? And what they did was Tanaka and Fuji were the champions. Bruno and Pedro wrestled them on TV. So they blind both of them with the salt. They start swinging. Next thing you know, Bruno and Pedro hitting each other, tempers flare. So then it's like, they're going to get each other. So they set Shea Stadium up. But the Democratic National Convention was coming to town. So the Garden was shut down for a couple of months. That's why Shea Stadium was used. So it's like, the bean counters were thinking, man, we can make big money off of this. And face versus face, and it didn't draw in the Northeast.
I would think that just the reputation of the former champion against the current champion, and with both being reasonably over, I would say, would draw a house. Would you not think? If you build it properly.
If you build it properly. But see, if you remember, there's a photo of George the Animal Steele charging the ring. The police have clubs around his neck. There's a couple of rumors. George Steele says to Monsoon, I bet you I could make it to the ring before the cops get me. And he's like, no, I bet you can't. There's also a rumor that the old man said, this is dying. Go out there, George, do your thing. Get the crowd going.
It could be. Yeah.
I think that makes more sense.
My question is to you, George, my question to you, could Nick Bockwinkel, working against the former champion, or let's say Ottawa's or whatever, could they be able to work a match in Minneapolis and keep the crowd engaged, whereas they lost the Pedro Bruno kept them going?
The simple answer is yes. But you guys, this is so fun. You've really got my brain working here. So let's talk about Pedro and Bruno for a minute, because you brought up that it's a historic match. I mean, it's one of the matches I remember from '72 and Shea Stadium. But here's the thing, and I always hate to play. I hate it when fans start playing armchair quarterback, to steal a football terminology. Play armchair quarterback and try to outguess the promoters and arrange things. Here's what I think went wrong with Pedro Morales, and in Bruno's defense here. Bruno gave up the title after 7.5, almost 8 years, as the best champion, the best draw. We're not going to debate that. He was God. But what the brainchild did was, we're going to bring Ivan Koloff in. And this was Bruno's choosing, by the way. He wanted Koloff to be his successor. That's a sign of respect right there. But here's where I think, in hindsight, and everything is in hindsight, if they wanted to get Pedro over, they should have let Koloff beat Bruno, and then for the next at least 6 months to a year, and I always said a year, let Koloff run roughshod as this hated Russian, the guy who stopped Bruno, and just stop every baby face, even maybe having a heel match. Just make Koloff a killer heel.
Champion. Make him the champion,
then,
not just a fluke.
Then, let's say just 6, 7, 8, 10 months down the road. Now Pedro Morales comes across. Obviously, he had some ethnic support, the Puerto Rican popularity. But then you have him beat Koloff. Then Pedro, by that time, the fans have kind of eased away from Bruno. They've kind of forgotten about, not that they've forgotten about him, but we got to stop Koloff. But they did it just the opposite. They had Koloff beat Bruno, and 2 weeks later, guess what? Pedro wins. My logic tells me that means Bruno lost to two guys. Because if you want to make it real, if Pedro could beat Koloff and Koloff beat Bruno, well, then that means Pedro could have won over Bruno. I just think they could have gotten Pedro over a lot more than the way they just switched it. And then here's your champ, guys. And people are still bleeding because their hero Bruno lost.
And Pedro was the United States champion at the time, as recognized by the Navy.
I watched that match right before we came on between Koloff and Pedro Morales. That crowd was electric during that match. Yeah. And when he won, the place exploded. Police were up on the ring apron to keep the crowd from coming in the ring. It was a magical night, for no doubt about it. But I think you're right.
Bruno put the belt on him.
Yeah, and then Bruno came into the match, and I think you're right. They should have made Koloff a long-standing champion. Right at that point, they just made him the fluke. It was like a fluke.
But here's the thing, guys.
That's his first defense, then he loses.
In hindsight, it wasn't a poor result for Koloff, because we know that he lived the rest of his career with that WWF title as his publicity. But here's the thing about Pedro, too. We talked earlier about wrestlers that go to a different territory, and can they get over outside of their own hometown environment? After Pedro lost the WWF title, Vern Gagne brought him in to the AWA. And I'm going to tell you right now, he had title matches against Nick Bockwinkel. He worked his way up to title matches in the way it worked. But the crowd, the fans, I hate to say this, and I was among them. I'm looking at Pedro and I'm going, and I remember at the time I said, what in the hell did the fans see in this guy as champion? He just did not get the fans in, and I live in Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities. He did not get the fans off their seat. When he wrestled Nick, it was one of the few times, I swear to you, it was one of the few times when the fans just were not into the match, and Nick Bockwinkel was doing everything he could. Pedro did not get over in the AWA. Now, out in California and on the East Coast, Pedro could do it. So I think this moving territory thing, sometimes it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
George, I've always said he was a better intercontinental champion than he was heavyweight champion.
I think I'd agree with you. Yes.
Yeah, and tag team champion. He was, had a good run and was popular.
Victor Rivera, God rest his soul, there's a lot of controversy over Victor. I think Victor was it was looking like he could be the successor, but he had some problems. And I don't know if they wanted, like Snuka, I don't know if they wanted to trust him, so they went with Pedro.
Well, and I think that's the key thing. You just used a key word, that trust. The promotion, the promoters, they had to trust. And we know from hindsight as well that when they went with outside that gut feeling, sometimes it's disastrous. In the case of, we had Stan Hansen, who I love as a human being. I've talked with him. He's a nice, quiet, decent man, at least today. But we know that back in his era, he was as independent as they come, and he didn't want any promoter to tell him what he could or couldn't do, and he wasn't going to do what they wanted him to do. He looked out for himself. And when Vern put the title on him, and I'll tell you this, it was out of desperation, because Nick Bockwinkel and Jack Lenz, and I just talked about this on another podcast here a week or so ago. They both told Vern, they said, Vern, don't do it. Don't give it to Hansen. But Vern needed a big national name, because he was fighting for his life with this expansion era, with Hogan gone, 1985, 86, and Rick Martel, God bless him, he was our champion at the time. But Rick, as good as he was dull to the AWA fans as a babyface. And his interviews, you go to sleep. And Rick's a great worker. That's unfair to say that about him. But Vern had to go with a name. So he goes with Hansen. Well, we all know what happened. Hansen and Vern didn't get along from day one. Hansen didn't want to work dates. He was busy with Japan. Vern took it for so long. There's talk about how they couldn't get along over money. And eventually Vern just said, you know what? I want the title off of you. You're losing it tonight to Nick. This was in Denver. And Hansen said, screw you, I'm going to Japan. And he had a 2-week or a 3-week tour over in Japan set up. Vern said, I've had enough. You're losing it. He took the belt, left the building. Nick became the champion by default. Whether that's a good decision or not, who knows? But it was a spur of the moment. Program subject to change. He had a crowd full of people, and the challenger or the champion had left the building. So the bottom line is, when you go with your gut feeling and you don't have that trust, you have a situation like Hansen. When you go with your gut and what you believe and you trust in a man, and that's where Vern and Nick, they had such a special, on air, everybody, they hated each other's guts, and they were enemies to the core. But Vern and Nick were like this. And Nick told me more than once, he said, I was there as Vern's employee, and no matter what he asked me to do, unless it was illegal, he said, I would do it. And that was what Vern knew. He knew he could trust Nick on any given night. If he'd have said to Nick on the Denver night at the spur of the moment, I want you to drop the title to Joe Schmo, Nick would have done it. That's what you need.
Jonathan, I know, Jonathan, you said you had another question real quick. What was it?
Yes, and I know this will probably get into a tangent, but I definitely not at all. But no, not the four of us. But I wanted to bring this up because George started this off, and it makes sense.
Just a troublemaker.
Yes, no, but George started this off in his initial 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Or 4 minutes and 30 seconds, excuse me, about promos.
30 seconds.
And no, but there was the promos from the heart. And I thought of also Jake Roberts and I don't know who mentioned it, about speaking softly to get their point across. But with these three gentlemen, and I would like to hear from all three, is because obviously nowadays promos are a big deal. So what was the aspect of the promo from these three guys' generation to bring people into the arena? Whether you're talking the St. Paul Civic Center, the Madison Square Garden, or wherever the NWA champion might be, Charlotte or Houston or LA or wherever it may be.
Rodney, you start.
Well, as far as Jack Brisco does, you have to remember that the World Heavyweight Championship wasn't basically, or the NWA was an institution itself. And it was built not by Jack Brisco, but those who came before him. It was built by Kaninsky and with Dory Funk Jr., who was a brilliant champion, just a fantastic champion. And the standard was already set from Buddy Rogers to Lou Thez. And so you had just being the world champion made you somebody. All right. So now the world heavyweight champion is Jack Brisco. He can go to say Memphis to face Jerry Lawler. That's automatically a sellout. And just Jack Brisco talking about, and even his monotone way of talking about, how he's faced this person and that person, and now Jerry Lawler, who before that had done something to, I think he did something to Jerry in that particular time. He comes in there as this time he's playing the hero champion. And so he's able to, if he needs to, he can raise his voice. He can become whatever the moment requires. That was the NWA champion at that point's responsibility, to become whatever is needed at that moment. It could be, this time I'm working in Georgia against Buddy Colt. The next time I'm coming to Georgia, I'm working with Mr. Wrestling 2. So it's whatever is necessary and needed to draw the house. And he could acclimate his interview for that. And that's the way I saw it. And not only could he do it, Harley could do it. NWA had a tremendous way of grooming their champions, and what it looks like, what happened with Vern Gagne, he couldn't groom the next champion. He went out and he found Nick Bockwinkel, and he groomed him for many years. And what ended up happening, the same thing that eventually happened with the NWA. That's the reason Ric Flair was the champion for so long, is they stopped the grooming process. And so we got, I'm not going to say stuck with Flair for 6 8 years, but there was no one groomed to be that next step, the next person to be in line. And I think same thing kind of happened with Bruno and with Pedro. He wasn't groomed to be world champion, where Jack was groomed to be world champion.
And the reason I asked that question, sorry, Nikita, was because, and the reason I asked was because I remember a Bobby Heenan quote talking about Nick Bockwinkel, in terms of, if you ask Nick what time it was, Nick was the type of guy who would tell you how to build a watch. Nikita?
I'm going to throw a name of a guy that touched all three of these areas on top, Kenny Patera. Now, he didn't have to scream and holler because he had credibility. You could look at him and know this guy can kill you if he wants to. So he would come out and just basically do his thing. He didn't have to scream, even though he had goofy Lou Albano in the beginning. And it's like, Lou would take off, but Patera didn't have to do it. So Bruno could match that. It's like, Bruno loved working with Patera because it was usually a strongman match. And Patera would do whatever you asked because he was a professional. But he had that weightlifting title behind him. He was credible. Somebody like a Spiros Arion, he never had to scream and holler. He could come out and talk, but you knew this guy could beat Bruno. And that's what a lot of people that minds of the business from back in the 70s era would say, Zbyszko and Bruno was a great angle, but the reason Arion versus Bruno was a better angle because we were afraid Arion could beat him. And he could. He had that reputation and credibility. It's like, this could be the guy that does it. So there's your difference. It didn't have to scream and holler, but I've already done damage and I'm coming to do more. Sometimes silent is better.
And in lots of cases, like you were saying in the WWE, and even with Bockwinkel, Bockwinkel's not screaming and holler, but Bobby Heenan's having a fit and having literally a nervous breakdown on television. You're saying the same thing with the managers there, most of which Bruno opponents had a manager, whether it be Fred Blassie or Albano or the Grand Wizard. They're the ones losing their minds while the wrestlers kind of standing there, keeping their composure in some cases.
I want to get into this thing about grooming a champion. Mm-hmm. I guess I've mentioned to you guys now about how Vern picked Nick Bockwinkel to be his successor. They recruited him to come into the AWA. Vern wanted to give him the title much earlier than he did. What really happened, and this has been discussed before, but it's just an interesting thing about how the program is subject to change, which are the words at the top of every lineup that we ever saw. Vern was technically going to give Nick the championship around later 1971, probably early 72. But what happened was on July 24th, 1971, when Hercules Cortez was killed in an auto accident coming back from Winnipeg, and that very night in Minneapolis, he was supposed to wrestle Nick Bockwinkel in a battle that was going around the AWA at the time of the Battle of the Unbeatens. Cortez and Bach. And the idea is that Nick was going to win and start getting some title matches with Vern, which Vern had intended would lead to him getting the title. But here's what happened. Cortez was half of the tag champs with Red Bastien. And the formula there is that Vern had decided after the Vachons gave their notice after almost 3 years as champions to go up to Montreal and promote, that Cortez and Bastien were given the title, and it was planned on to be about a 2.5, 3 year run. Bastien had a home in Minneapolis. It made sense. Well, when Cortez was killed, Vern had a dilemma. He needed tag champs. So he did what he always did. He called the Crusher, had him fill in, say, come on out. I want you to be champs with Bastien. Crusher said, I'll do it, but I'll do it only for a short time. I don't want to be champion, because Crusher didn't enjoy that thing. He wanted to be able to take his self-imposed vacations. And then he was injured, But here's the deal. Nick was very good that night on 24th July. He wrestled a non-title match with Vern Gagne, who stepped in for Hercules. The idea being I didn't have a chance to prepare for this guy, so I won't put the title on the line. But Nick won, non-title match. That set the stage. But Ray Stevens got involved, and that's when Vern realized, I'm going to put the tag title on the heel champions, became Nick and Ray, and then I don't have to wrestle as much. And he drew with Nick and Ray for 2 years as heels like you wouldn't believe. Well, so the deal was Nick was still groomed to be the champion. Now, if you go back to the NWA formula, we all know how many times the NWA went to Lou Thez.
Yes.
To pull him out. They pulled him out of retirement in the Buddy Rogers situation.
Right.
Buddy Rogers, I don't know if the stories are true. We hear this, that, and the other thing. But Lou Thez, and I will tell you, Lou Thez told me this in person in 2001 at the Cauliflower Alley Club. He said, I told Buddy Rogers, I'm going to win tonight. We can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. Because Buddy wasn't excited about Lou Thez. They didn't get along personally. They respected each other for the business. But so Lou went in and won the title. We know Buddy became WWF champion, whatever it was. And the rest is history with Bruno. But Lou Thez was a go-to guy. We also know that when Lou Thez was going to lose the title in 57 or 59, he was going to lose it. 57. He was going to lose it, and he picked his successor, Dick Hutton. And you talk about a great wrestler, all the collegiate background, all the accolades. He was a real deal. He was a real worker. He was believable. But he was as boring as watching your front lawn grow during the summer. He couldn't draw. And so after just a short time, they got it off of him and they put it on O'Connor. And we know how that went. It was Pat O'Connor was a good draw. The planning, the succession, I think it's just, these guys, the promoters knew what they wanted to do, but sometimes it was the business that threw them the curve. And we may as well just say this, Nick Bockwinkel, if I make my case for Nick. Vern knew he could go to Nick at any time up until the time he retired. And that's the reason Nick had four title reigns, because Vern could go to him if he had to. And people will say Hulk Hogan should have been the champion and we'd have never had an expansion era. Vince McMahon would have been stopped. Well, I don't believe that for a nanosecond. But here's the deal, guys. Vern Gagne was never, if he lived to be 110, was never going to put the title on Hogan, because Hogan was not a wrestler. He was a performer, a character, correct, charismatic as he was. But let me tell you something. Hulk Hogan was only over in the AWA, and he made a great challenger for Nick Bockwinkel with Heenan in his corner. And Vern was drawing so well with Nick, Hogan was a better challenger. It was just never going to happen. So Hogan left. We know what happened.
Run with it, George, because Hogan without the machine behind him was shit. Because when he was in the WWF in 80 and 81 under Fred Blassie, when he had some decent matches with Backlund, decent, not good, and then he actually was brought in to feud with Andre. They were okay, not great. So when Vince comes up with all these crazy ideas and NBC's behind them and all this other bullshit, okay, then Hogan was able to ride that carpet into right into the bank. But as a wrestler, you got it. No, you're shit. You're not going to make it, man. Forget it.
Well, I will buy into the fact that Hogan was the right guy at the right time for McMahon to do what he wanted to do. I will give him that. But
because I will Rocky too. If it wasn't for the movie, we would have never known about Hogan.
Well, and the thing is, we just always need to remember that when Vince started his expansion and Nick was champion, he left, Hogan left. We got to remember that Vern had already teased to a Hogan and Andre feud. They had started, it's on tape for AWA. They were in tag teams together and they started a little pushing and shoving. Who's bigger, better, the whole thing. Well, Vince eventually took that and used it. Vince used a lot of the ideas from the AWA. He took Jesse and Adrian, the East-West connection. He took Martel and Santana and turned them into a tag team that Vern had a success with them. He took Bobby Heenan and made him, without Bobby Heenan, what a coup. Now, the business was so ugly from 1984 till about 1991, not only for Vern, but for every single territory. And Nick Bockwinkel told me in 1987, he said, this is why I realized that it was time for me just to slowly go away and not be involved anymore as a wrestler, because he understood his era was over. And it changed. It was totally different. And Bobby Heenan came to Vern Gagne and he said, I've been offered a contract from Vince, but I'm going to finish out my contract with you. Bobby Heenan was the only wrestler that did that. And he was a heel. And he did what Vern asked. Now, you want to talk about giving credibility and giving kudos to somebody. Vince McMahon took Mad Dog Vachon, who at that point in his career was an older man. He had, other than the AWA, he wasn't going to do Vince any good, except when Vince would come into one of our towns, he could put the dog on the card. Now, here's class for you guys. The night that Mad Dog Vachon was scheduled to wrestle against Bruiser Brody, King Kong Brody here. He was scheduled to wrestle him. And the dog went to Vern and he said, I've been offered money from Vince. I'm at the end of my career. I don't know that I can pass it up. I've only got so many paydays left. He told Vern, he says, I'll go out. I'll finish my contracts with you. And the night of the match, Vern told the dog, he said, stay behind. Don't go out, Mad Dog. And he sent Steve Olsenowski, a nobody. I mean, Steve was a great worker, but compared to the dog, Steve Olsenowski went out. Now, Vern could have been a jerk and said, well, you son of a you-know-what. Everything I've done for you and you're going to go. He pulled Mad Dog off the card. And he could have went out and told Brody, kick the crap out of him. And Brody, he'd have done it. I mean, he's crazy enough to have done it. So Vern had that kind of respect for the Mad Dog. And then a week later, 2 weeks later, here's Mad Dog appearing on WWF cards. It was still WF at that time. And just for the sake. But Nick Bockwinkel was the class act, guys. You talk about a man who respected the business. And then look at his Houston. I know I'm making a case for Nick here again, but look at Houston. When he went into Houston for Paul Bosch, a non-AWA territory, he wrestled that one card in the summer of, without looking at the date, I think it was 79. He wrestled a 30-minute draw with Jose Lothario. The main event was supposed to be Harley Race against Terry Funk for the NWA title. Harley didn't show up. Nick went in and did a whole hour with Terry. And from that was the second time that Harley had some appearance issues with Bosch. And Paul Bosch started recognizing Nick as the AWA champion in Houston, with Vern's blessings, of course, but it was non-AWA city. Never was an AWA city, and Nick was down there defending. And then he started defending in Memphis. Bockwinkel did. I mean, the promoters were realizing that Nick was Mr. Reliability and a guy you could count on. And that's the reason those things started.
And honestly, Jimmy Crockett and Ric Flair actually pulled themselves from the other places too, from World Class, from Houston, from the Continental, because even Continental, we had Nick Bockwinkel, who I met, and is an awesome individual. I was afraid to talk to him because back then we were told not to speak to a wrestler unless spoken to. And so he came. I had worked a little angle thing with Dutch Mantel and Wendell Cooley, and I'm coming back. I'm in Chattanooga. I come back up onto the stage, and he said, I heard in the background. I said, that went well. This was Nick Bockwinkel talking to me, and he and I said, excuse me. He said, yes, that went very well, I think, and because he watched the whole thing, and then we talked from that on, and he was so approachable, so very nice, so professional. I'll never forget. And I watched he and Wendell Cooley do a match in Knoxville, Tennessee. Blew everybody away. Bockwinkel was the true professional, no doubt about that.
Well, we have to give credit to guys, and I don't know about Bruno in this case, but I do know that Nick Brisco, Harley Race, Gene Kiniski, I'm going to throw in there, maybe Dory Jr. too. These were guys that could go in and make their challenger look so much better than they may have been. You know, we've heard the saying that Harley could wrestle a broomstick and the fans would be convinced the broomstick should have won. That's a hell of a compliment, guys. You know, when you've got it, and the champion can go away with his tail between his legs, but he's still the champion.
But George, they could have all done that easily.
Well, not necessarily. Let me tell you this. If Billy Robinson would have been AWA champion, this is the $1 million question, kids. Everybody says, well, Billy was the one that should have been a champion because he could really wrestle. He looked like a champion. He was a wrestler. Billy Robinson would have been the worst champion we ever had, because if Billy didn't want to work with you, it didn't matter. If he didn't want to work with you, he would not. And Vern Gagne had problems with it.
Well, that's a risk. And that is a risk.
Vern said himself, he said, I like Billy. Billy's dependable for me, but I can't trust Billy. Because if I tell him I want him to lose tonight, or Billy's not going to do it if he doesn't want to. Well, what kind of an employee is that, where you don't do what your employer asks you to do? You know, and that goes back with the Stan Hansen thing.
Bruno would make some of the lesser guys look good at Nassau County Coliseum, which was the B-town in New York.
Yeah.
Butcher Vachon, who in 75 was a little beyond. So they didn't put him in the Garden main event. They put him in Nassau. The Wolfman, Farkas, Bruno made him look good, but he still, Bruno's going to go over. Now, I'll tell you what, he saved Kenny Patera's career because it was the first run back in 77. It was January the 17th, and it wasn't snow, but it was severe cold and gale winds where the rail froze. People couldn't get through on the subway. So Senior's like, that's it. This is over with. He's done. And Bruno's like, no, it's not him. They can't get here. Because they were 4,000 short. So you know how much money they lost. So Bruno was able to talk to Senior, and it's like, okay, Patera was able to get the next couple of matches in. And of course, the rest is history. But he could have died on the vine that night. And it wasn't his fault.
I've got to jump
Bruno
in.
Spoke up for him.
Yeah, I got to jump in, and I'm trying not to play sides with any of these people. I love all three of these performers.
Hey, I love all of them. I do.
I got to tell a story. When I was researching my book, The Wrestlers, Masters, The Craft of Professional Wrestling, available on Amazon and all fine booksellers everywhere.
A great book, I will add.
When I was having an amazing conversation with another legend of the AWA, one of the truly great wrestlers, genuine wrestlers that never gets the credit for that, the great Jim Rashke, the Baron.
Yeah.
And he told me a story about what to him made Bruno Sammartino a wrestler's wrestler. He said there's very few people that know who they are. And that sounds weird to people who don't know the inside of a sport or something, but people have confidence and there's that, but there's some people that just know who they are and what they mean to people. And he said Bruno had that. He didn't have to show off or do anything because, there's a great book, because he knew who he was. And he said when Bruno was brought up by Tunney to work in Toronto after he had left Vince Sr.
Fired.
I wanted to be nice. That they were trying to figure out how are we going to get Bruno over in Toronto. It's not New York with the Italian ethnic crowd, not realizing there's a lot of Italians in Toronto. And they brought in the Baron. He was so big in Montreal, they would know who he was in Toronto as a heel, and we can put him in with Bruno, get Bruno over with the fans by beating this horrible heel. And he goes, and I'm in the ring with Bruno, and Bruno starts calling the match, which is a no-no. The heels are supposed to call the match. And he says, Bruno's just telling me, beat on me. Get me down. Kick me. Gouge my eyes. Punch me. Hit me. Beat me. And Bruno's not making a comeback. But Rashke tells me that as he's doing this, he starts feeling the crowd move in. And he starts looking around the ring, and the several rows around the ring, every punch and every kick, the people took one step closer to that ring. To the point where they were against the ring apron, about to jump in the ring to defend Bruno's life. And he goes, and at that moment, Bruno looked up at me, winked, and said, I'll take over now. That's a performer who knows who he is. And he knows his power and he knows his ability. Bockwinkel had that. He knew who he was, how to work over a crowd. That's the one thing I think Brisco may have been lacking in this, is that Brisco was such a good technical worker and such a skilled athlete and such a serious athlete. But I don't think he had that power to make those people feel for him like Bockwinkel could make them hate him or Bruno could make them love them. What's your guys' take on that? Do you think that plays into what makes them the best, knowing who they are and being able to do that, or just the pure ability of someone like Brisco?
Rodney, you got to take that.
I want Rodney to take this, but I just want to make a quick comment, and I will make it quick. I think with the case of Bruno and Bockwinkel, they had an advantage because they were, as you will say, familiar to the fans they were wrestling in front of. Whereas Brisco and most of the NWA champions, and Rodney, you can correct me if you think I'm crazy here, a lot of times they were coming into a territory where, for the most part, other than being billed as the world champion coming in, they were not as well known. They didn't have the compassion or the feeling. They were just a champion. And I don't know if that makes sense what I'm saying, but I think that's what the deal was with Bruno and Bockwinkel, since those are our two. They had the fans in their pockets all the time, and they knew how to work one crowd against the other or opponent, however it was. So, Rodney, go.
Thank you. Jack knew how to sell. That is the key. I think that was exactly what Bruno did in Toronto. He sold. And that's what Jack Brisco can do. He can sell. And you watch a match, whether it was Jerry Lawler, he sold his tail off. It don't matter if it was Buddy Colt. And then when Jack made his comeback, the people were there. They were with him in the end. Tommy Rich was the king of the selling, but Jack Brisco was just as good, and he knew his role. If his role was sell, and the more he sold, the more believable it was. You could feel his pain no matter where you were sitting, in the front row or in the back. And so the key to anything is to sell. And Brisco was great at it. And all you have to do, like I said, just check it out. There's videos of he and Buddy Colt. It looked like Buddy was going to win it. There's videos between Bill Watts and Jack Brisco, and Jack is just selling his tail off, and then he makes that big comeback, and those people are with him. And again, it's very rare. It was rare back then for the world champion, the NWA world champion, to be babyface. And Jack pretty much was across the board anywhere he went. In fact, I believe he was pretty much the last ones, because after Jack came Terry Funk, and Terry started doing the bounties, and then Harley Race was interfering in local stuff, whereas Jack wasn't interfering in any local stuff. He was pretty much just the champion coming in, and it was above all the rest of it. But like I said, watch how Jack sells, and he's able to reach, and this is his talent. That's part of his talent, to be able to go into places that maybe people don't know him, but in the end, they will feel for him, just like Bruno Sammartino did in that match with Rescue.
I think we could make a point when you talk about the selling too for any of the champions. And I'm going to kind of defend Bruno on this one, and I'll do this with Nick too. One of the greatest angles in pro wrestling was to have a trusted friend, tag team partner, confidant turn on you. And in the case of Bruno, we know how well it worked for when Bill Watts back in 1963 or whatever it was, 65, when they were tag team partners, they were friends, but Bill wanted a title match, and somehow it wasn't going to happen. Before you know it, Bill says, I've had enough. I'm going to kick this guy's behind from here to Abruzzi, Italy. And their matches were classics. And, Bill Watts made a name out of it coming from that. And Bruno got over because his partner had turned on him. And then you mentioned Spiros Arion a few times. I remember when that happened, how huge that was, because Bruno and Spiros, they were, in the 60s, when I was looking at the later 60s, when I was looking at wrestling magazines, it was like Bruno, Arion, and in those days he was Antonio Puglisi, I think it was pronounced. Later Parisi, Tony Parisi, but he was the cousin of Bruno and so on. But when Arion turned on him, that was box office. And then when we had Nick Bockwinkel, when Ray Stevens went berserk and turned on the Heenan family and on Nick, that was unnatural. You've always got, if you got that turn on the partner angle or turn on the champion angle, those make the best matches. They just do.
But George, that's why I said earlier when Zbyszko did it, who was Bruno's true protege,
right?
Bruno would murder him. It's like Bruno could still draw. He let Larry listen to him, and it's like, look, you're not going to ever beat me. So let's do this. Let's play cat and mouse. You kick me in the balls, and okay, I'm getting the best of you. You kick me in the balls and run away, and everybody wants to just.
I will never ask any of you to kick me in the balls.
And let me just say about Zbyszko.
That's Sarah's job, by the way.
He did that. Whose?
My girlfriend's job.
Yeah, Zbyszko did the same thing with Nick Bockwinkel. They were partners. They were confidants together here in the AWA. And Zbyszko is one of the guys that turned Nick babyface because he turned on him. They did a couple different angles in different cities as far as the face turn for Nick. But here locally, we had Zbyszko going crazy with nunchucks, and he decked Bockwinkel when Nick tried to go in and tell him to quit. He's gone too far. And they had great matches together. And that's the great thing. Nick was able to pull that off too, because he could make Zbyszko more hated than he was. And then from there out, Nick finished the last couple of years as a baby. And it's the greatest thing in the world. The champions, I give such great respect for what they did.
And timing. You got to have timing because with Bruno and Zbyszko, aside from the heel turn when Bruno bled, there was no blood until the very last cage match in Shea Stadium.
Right.
That was
right.
And a point of the NWA champion and of Jack Brisco, he was the cause of a friend to turn on a friend in the territory so that they could get a chance at the World Heavyweight Champion. So he was the linchpin to create the same things you're talking about in the companies.
Which scenario are you talking about? Who did the turn?
Well, I'm talking about like for instance, Bob Armstrong turns on Ron Fuller so that he can get on hold of, that kind of thing. And the world champion is the cause of it. Going after the World Heavyweight Championship is the reason for it. but the angle stays in the territory while the champion is going out, and they're waiting for him to come back for the big match again. You see what I'm saying?
Jonathan, I know you got a question. I can see the smoke coming out of your headphones.
That's scary, but that's just because I got the old circus monkey symbols, and never mind. Yeah, that's a whole nother story. But it's a two-parter, and I'll start with Nikita because I know the Northeast Territory best, but it's actually a two-parter, and I guess just started doing your initial volley, and there was a famous story that I heard about with the Iron Sheik, not the Sheik from Detroit, defending Bruno in a backstage fight. I guess it was Pittsburgh Steelers and stuff.
Yep.
But also, and I'm hoping George and Mr. West can elaborate on their territories as well. But also, there was a rumored story, and I don't know how true it is because we know everything on the internet is true.
Absolutely.
That apparently when Bruno was having his feud with Superstar Graham at the time, that Bruno asked to, or at least offered to take the title off of Superstar because Superstar wasn't feeling it and there was a face turn or whatever for when he was going to drop the belt to Backlund. So was there a lot of politicking and defending amongst the boys, I guess I would ask?
No, Bruno actually wanted Superstar to take the belt because Bruno, he knew he had to come back for Shea Stadium with Hanson, but it was hurting. And it was like, look, I'm not going to last long with this, so you better pick another champion. And Patera was pissed off that it wasn't him, but they said, okay, we're going to go with Graham. And the story goes, the old man said, you're going to win it April 30th, 77, and you're going to drop it February 20th, 78, because we're going to bring in Backlund. Bruno, no, he had no problem with Superstar. They had to bring him just to make sure. He co-main evented a couple of cards because they wanted to make sure Superstar was going to draw, which there was no question. He did. He was crazy over. And then, Bruno was able to fade and go recover for a while because it was just, it's brutal. As you know, it's like a football player or anybody else of the physical sport, wrestling. You're just taking a beating, which is beyond brutality. It's like being in 12 car accidents. And I got to know Bruno years later, and he had a couple of car accidents, and all that started to come back. And it was like, man, why did I do that to myself? Jeez.
Yeah, imagine how people who drove with Harley Race felt.
Yeah. Guys, I'm going to have to wrap. I got to go.
All right, Nikita, you're out. We're going to let you go, but George and Rodney, can I keep you for to finish this question?
Nikita, great meeting you. Thank you.
You too, George. And thank you for the Blackjacks and Ray Stevens. We made and Larry the Axe Hennig. Thank you.
And Nikita, we got to connect soon for a one-on-one.
I owe you. Yes, I do.
Let's get together on the Facebook pages.
You got it. Thank you, Rodney. Good to see you again, too.
Thank you, Nikita.
God bless you guys.
Thank you.
Take care, buddy.
Long live Bruno. Forever.
Yes. Yes.
Brian.
Yes, George, I wanted to ask, just like Jonathan asked there, which was a great question, with the politicking between the boys, not Vern or The Office, but when Bockwinkel was champ, was there a lot of politicking amongst the boys about, we all know the stories about when Hogan was politicking, thinking he should be champ. But I mean, in Nick's heyday, was there any politicking amongst the boys thinking, hey, Nick, I should be your successor? Or was that strictly Office?
No, I can tell you almost emphatically that there was no jealousy, no politicking. Everybody agreed, respected, looked up to, and was okay with Nick Bockwinkel. Nick was a guy that got along with everybody. All his hated opponents, of course, that was the illusion in the wrestling, but Nick was respected. There isn't anybody. And, you mentioned earlier, and that'll lead me into this, you mentioned earlier the name Otto Watts. there's a sore on the AWA that the genius of it, there's a twofold thing here. The genius of the Otto Vance title win, and it was only for 2.5, 3 months, whatever it was. It was from August to October of 1982. The genius of it was that it made wrestling appear real because it showed the fans that on any given night, some challenger that they may or may not know could upset the champion. You know, when you had Hulk Hogan and Bockwinkel wrestling everywhere for a year, or you had Billy Robinson against Nick Bockwinkel every year for how many years, and so on, you didn't have that illusion that Nick could be beat. So out of the ordinary comes Otto Vance. And here's the deal. This was a private deal that Otto had went to Vern Gagne with. Nick was in on it. And Otto wanted to be the champion so that when he was back, he was a promoter in Austria, Germany. He wanted to come back and be announced as the world champion and the former world champion. So he agreed with Vern that he would beat Nick, or Vern agreed with him that he would beat Nick, and then 2 months later, Nick would get it back. However, they didn't tell anybody they were going to do it. Vern had a way of keeping secrets. Nick Bockwinkel knew on that night in August that he was going to lose, but Bobby Heenan didn't. Now that's weird. That's weird. And if you watch, I think the tape is out there on YouTube. If you watch the end of the match, Bobby Heenan is throwing one of his most memorable fits because he didn't know this was going to happen. Later on, he was let in on it that Nick and Vern had worked out a deal. Otto had paid Vern $50,000 for that 2 months to hold the title. What was wrong with Vern doing it? This was even before the promotional wars, guys. 1982, that was 2 years before the Hogan thing started with McMahon, robbing territory. So Vern just worked out a private deal. Otto came in, won the title, and everybody's like, Otto who? I was there that night for the match, and I can tell you, I like, how did this happen? This is kind of cool, but boy, this is stupid. But it worked. And it just showed you that and it made the AWA a worldwide promotion because now this guy from another country had come in and beaten Nick. And Vern also did a clever thing too, because he had Nick lose the title to Tommy Tsuruta, Jumbo Tsuruta, in Japan, with Baba's assistance in the promotion. But Nick lost the title, comes back, Tsuruta is the champion. Vern, before McMahon ever came territory robbing, was making the AWA an international promotion, showing that a Japanese challenger, and now we had an Austrian challenger come in here and could beat the champion. It made it really a world title, and that was his objective. So that's where the Otto Vance thing came from. And it was a total, I'm going to win at this date. I think it was, without looking, I think it was August 8th or something of 82. And then he lost it back on something like the 19th of October or something. I've got the exact dates, of course. But
I got it. I'll quote
They
up.
knew the first and they knew the end. And then Otto disappeared. He flowed into the sunset. Nobody ever heard from him.
I had my own Otto Vance moment. I was actually in the building the night the Honky Tonk Man beat Ricky Steamboat for the Intercontinental title when no one in the world liked that. They thought he was just a guy who was going to come in, be there for a few months and disappear. And Steamboat was this hero. And then the Honky Tonk Man beat Steamboat for the title. I was in the building that night, and you watch the clips of it and you hear the crowd going nuts. That's not what happened. They piped that in because that building was silent.
Yeah.
The date I have for the Otto Vance is October 9th, 1982 at the International Amphitheater in Chicago.
Losing the title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I should say Otto lost then, but I was reading the section underneath. But Otto won at the St. Paul Civic Center on August 29th, 1982. So,
and I was at that match. It was interesting. I actually was talking to Nick before the match started. And of course, Nick didn't let any clue in that what was going to happen. They didn't. It was still kayfabe and everything. But those two instances that I mentioned about Sharuda and Vance, they made, in my opinion, the illusion that the promoters wanted to give you that wrestling was real, that on any given night the champion could lose. I mean, it made it real, but that some unknown could do this. And Sharuda, he only held the title for a couple of months and he dropped it to Martel. And that was the objective there too. And as I alluded to much earlier tonight, the sad thing about Ricky Martel, I liked him as champion. I did. But Vern had a formula. When I mentioned about Bruno losing to Koloff and they should have let Koloff win be champion for a while, the fans, whether in hindsight, today's fans don't get it. But in Vern Gagne's day, Vern Gagne was God in the ring. And he was popular. And I can show you attendance records. When Vern was on the marquee, attendance was up. Doesn't matter when it was in his career. He had name value. And the fans would not accept another babyface champion. And Rick Martel couldn't live in that image. Vern drew better with a heel champion if Vern wasn't the champion, if that makes sense. That's why Bockwinkel was so good.
And
Bockwinkel was the golden goose for the AWA.
And the same thing would be true about Pedro Morales and Bruno Sammartino, because once Bruno drops to superstar, it makes sense. You see, they maintained their crowds, maintained the audience.
The chase.
And then Pedro was different because it looked like he was taking Bruno Sammartino's place. Same thing happened in the Mid-South with Magnum TA losing the title to Ernie Ladd, and then Brad Armstrong came behind him and beat Ernie Ladd. Well, people always felt like that was TA's belt, just like they think the AWA title was Vern's belt, just like they thought the WWF championship was Bruno Sammartino's. So what you said would make absolutely perfect sense.
And I think we talked earlier about a wrestler knowing the crowd, knowing how to work the crowd. Yes. I give credit to the guys that were wrestlers in the business as promoters. People say, well, why was Vern champion 10 times for, 10, 15 years? Well, number one, because he owned the company, but we didn't know that. But number two, and most important, he could trust Vern Gagne. And he could wrestle. And he could draw fans. So to say that, well, he put the title on him because he owned the company, that's not fair, guys. It isn't. It is the reason, but it's not fair to say that's the only reason. Vern couldn't trust every wrestler. And what you got to realize is that when he got Nick was that perfect man. He couldn't even totally trust the Crusher all the time. And the Crusher worked for Vern for 20 years. The Crusher was kind of, in his own way, his independent wrestler that the guys like Hanson and those became. Crusher didn't want to be champion. He didn't, but Vern would go to him because he could draw fans. And you'd be the champion for a couple months, or you'd be the tag champions for 5 different times. But it was all under Crusher's, I'll do it for you, but let's not make this a long-term deal.
Well, it's no different what Vern did than what Eddie Graham did or Fritz von Erich did. Jerry Jarrett did the same thing. Bill Watts did the same thing. They keep themselves in pretty good shape, so if they need to come in, they can come in and draw a house.
And I'll tell you this. Vern Gagne retired at 55 years old in 1981. He actually retired from the ring. He said he was leaving. Well, of course, we all know, you're retired until some angle down the road comes up. But the bottom line was he did leave active wrestling for 2 years. When he came back in 83, it was through the beautiful angle of Mad Dog Vachon taunting him and teasing him, provoking him to be his tag team partner because he said Vern owed him a favor because the dog had helped him out one time 5 years earlier. And the dog said, you owe me a favor. Well, that's a perfect angle. And the Vern says, yeah, I don't want to come out of retirement, but I think I agree with the dog. I owe him a favor. So we'll have this match. They were going against the Sheik, Adnan Casey, and Jerry Blackwell. And he says, after we have this match, Mad Dog and him, you go your way, I'll go my way. But you know how big that match did? How it drew fans? Because Vern was coming out of retirement. That's what wrestling was all about. You got to put the guy on top that is going to draw the people.
Now we're approaching the 2-hour mark, so we're going to have to wrap it up soon.
That's totally awesome, notwithstanding
Yeah, but what
Vince McMahon would say.
I got to ask Rodney a real quick question before I give you both the last your 1 minute summation. But I need Rodney to channel his father for a moment. And again, Rodney's father was the legendary referee, promoter, booker, office worker, just all around knowledgeable guy. And one of the most universally respected people in the business. I mean, I've never talked to anybody who ever went through any of those territories that did not have the utmost respect for Ron West. As a man and as a businessman and as a boss or confidant or anything, your father had to deal with these guys when the NWA touring champ would come into town. Did the temperature in the locker rooms change? And did it become a politicking thing? And if so, how did your father deal with it when a Jack Brisco or a Harley Race or a Dory Funk would come into town?
There was no change because the booker was in control most of the time. Was Ole Anderson or was the Fullers? Or in the case over there was either Dory Funk Jr. in the Carolinas, Dory Funk Jr. or George Scott. Everybody knew their role, and they were all professionals. Everybody knew that when Jack Brisco was coming into Georgia, we know who was going to work with him. It was either going to be Wrestling 2 or maybe Bob Armstrong. sometimes Tony Atlas. But most of the time, everybody knew the top guy, whoever that might be in the territory, was going to go against the world champion. It's the natural. That same thing in Florida. Buddy Colt, nobody's arguing when the champion comes to town and he's going against Buddy Colt. He's the top guy. That's the way it works. And so there was never any politicking or anybody hot over the fact. Now, there were some people, I think, too, was hot about the fact that Dusty was coming and headlining the main events and the Omni and that kind of thing, taking the big money where he was
if you
all
will
the time. Yeah. So other than that, as far as the world champion coming, everybody knew their role. If you're the top guy, you get the top spot against the world champion and make the big money.
Let me make a point here too, guys. And I think this probably answers something that, Brian, you asked earlier when you asked about, is there any politicking or any jealousy or any wrestlers that think they should have been on top instead of so-and-so the champion. This alone explains the beauty of the old territorial system that worked so well for so long around the United States. If there was a wrestler in the territory that had issues with some other wrestler or who was champion or what his push was or wasn't, all they had to do was go to another territory.
Exactly.
And they could find work. They could find work tomorrow because there were 30 other territories that they could go to. And most of these guys were skilled and good enough to get a job. So if they didn't like the champion or they didn't like that they didn't get the push they thought they should, they leave. And that's the way the business worked. That's why we had all these guys coming and going from all the different territories. Sometimes they just got tired of their shtick and said, I'm done with you. I'm going to go someplace else. So that's where the unhappiness wasn't there because the wrestlers didn't have to get unhappy. They could go somewhere else and wrestle. Today, and I don't want to get on today's wrestling, but if they don't work for the big one, where do they work?
Yeah.
Nowhere. Exactly.
Nowhere. And if they do work, they're making peanuts in some small gymnasium somewhere. God bless the independents.
And also, if you're in the Mid-South and you want to be on top, the Junkyard Dog's on top, you're Ted DiBiase, you're also a babyface, you want to be in the main event and get main event pay, what do? You go to Bill Watson and say, I want to turn on the Junkyard Dog and work against him.
Right.
That's business. That's business. You work with the top guy. If you're going to go to Minneapolis, you want to work with Vern Gagne or you want to work with Nick Bockwinkel. So you adjust yourself so you could be in the main event. Whatever it takes. Go to you're gonna go to
I'd like to talk
WWF. You want to be against Bruno because you want to make the main event money.
I want to talk about the babyface matches because I think a while back we touched on that sometimes they didn't draw well. Mm-hmm. Vern Gagne, after Bill Watts was in the AWA for 3 years, actually it was only 2 years, 67 to 69. And Bill Watts literally was one of our most popular wrestlers as a draw for those 2 years. Now we know Bill Watts can work either way. He can be the most hated SOB or he can be the most loved. And that's it. And that's just his personality. I mean, I love Bill Watts. I think he was a genius promoter mind in this business that I admire. But here's the deal, what I'm getting to. When he finally got to his matches with Vern Gagne, they never had a turn or anything. They had been tag partners. Bill had challenged him. Vern had said, well, there's other challengers, blah, blah, blah. Excuse me. When Watts finally got his chances, they did it over the course of a year. They had 4 matches, but they weren't back to back to back to back. They had one in April. They had one in June, one in November, and then one in late December. They spread it out. But what's interesting about it is 2 baby faces. And here's where Vern was at his best. When the fans attended those matches, at least the 4 I attended, the fans would cheer Bill Watts. They didn't boo Vern, but they cheered Bill Watts, if you understand what I'm saying. Yep. Vern was the subtle heel, and Bill was over. The fans wanted Bill to win, and it wasn't going to happen. So Vern never cheated. He never broke rules, but he'd do things like he'd slap Bill or something, and they'd have one of these, whoa, wait a minute here, But Vern, the fans didn't really boo because Vern was popular. But they cheered Bill Watts. You don't know how loud they cheered Bill Watts. That's making skill. And that's Bill Watts, or that's Vern Gagne knowing his audience as well, knowing that I can get Bill over, and Bill knowing that I can get over this guy who's so popular. 2 great minds.
That's
Bill Watts, Vern Gagne.
All right, we've established now that the
greatest promoters ever.
Yeah, we've established that the great workers in all these territories, the AWA, the WWF, all over the NWA, particularly in Georgia, they didn't do politicking. They knew their jobs. But I am not one of the great workers of all time, so I am going to do a bit of politicking right now.
Okay.
Shocker.
I know I came on to Jonathan's show and took it over because I'm a nerd and this was like a topic near and dear to my heart, and I was so excited for this. But
I give you the reins, sir.
I am politicking now on behalf of Crazy Train Radio that both of you guys have to hook up with Jonathan and come on and do one-on-one shows with him to talk about, anything you want, because you both are such fantastic guests. To get a full episode with each one of you and Jonathan would just be stellar. So we're going to try to set that up after the show, hook you guys all up together. That's my politic, and I'm politicking for Crazy Train Radio now. You guys both got to come on this show.
Well, I'll tell you this, if you follow any of the podcasts that are out there, I told my wife, I said, I don't know, sometimes I think I'm getting overexposed. I'm on too many of them, but yet I enjoy it. As you can tell, I have a passion for the history and for the sharing and some of the backstory stuff. I love it. So I'm on as many. I'm doing roughly about 2 or 3 podcasts a week, not the same ones, different people.
Wow.
and they're out there. Go to my wrestling page, George Shire's Wrestling Time Machine. That's my plug. Go to it. I've got all my podcasts pinned at the tops of the page. You can click on them and listen. If you got nothing better to do with your life than to listen to them or watch them.
And I do.
If I can, Brian, since Nikita had to leave, I will mention that I will have link for when it was real, Kindle version and such on all this. So check that out. You're going to
send this link to us as well, right?
Yes, sir.
Yep. And Rodney's his show should be plugged too. Pro Wrestling Inside and Out with the great Rodney and Brent West. Since Brent's not here, I'll say Rodney and his less attractive brother, right?
That's right.
My mother thinks Rodney's the most adorable person in the world because Rodney's been on my show, and she's like, that Rodney is the cutest thing in the world. She loves him.
Well,
and he was a part of the Terry Funk tribute you did, right, Brian?
That's right. Yes. I want to give both of you 1 minute, just 1 minute.
Should I set the timer? Or?
Yeah, you'll do the timer. We'll do 1 minute of one last pitch for your particular guy after all we've talked about with everybody else of what makes Jack Brisco stand out as the best of the TV era and what makes Nick Bockwinkel stand out in best of the TV era. And in no particular order, I'm going with Rodney first because he's on top of the screen. So, Rodney, you get 1 minute. Jonathan, tell him when he's good to go.
You were good.
Oh, thank you. First of all, I appreciate you for having me on. Actually, Jack Brisco was the last, as far as I'm concerned, of the scientific wrestling world champions. And it's not I'm not a knock on Nick Bockwinkel, who I think is brilliant, or Bruno Sammartino. But as far as the NWA champions, Jack was the last of the real athletes, as far as I'm concerned. He was the last of the real world champions that didn't involve themselves in, as far as I'm concerned, rinky-dink politic wrestling that they do on the show, such as putting up bounties and that kind of thing, starting storylines. Like I said, Jack was the very last of those. And as wrestling got more, I guess you said, centralized, and Jim Crockett Promotions took over the National Wrestling Alliance in the world, as far as I'm concerned, instead of the world champion, NWA champion, becoming bigger, he got smaller and smaller and smaller. And Jack was, like I said, I believe, the last of the great NWA world champions.
All right. George, I think we're going to give you 1.5 minutes. Because Nikita stole your 30 seconds from the beginning.
That's correct. He did.
I knew there was justice. Hey, guys, thank you. First of all, thank you. Sincerely, this was really fun. It was a blast. It was a great idea. Thank you for having me on. And I do hope I can join all of you, any of you, on your own podcast again and talk whatever. Any subject I'm good with. As far as Nick goes, here was a guy who I think would have been one of the best NWA champions had he taken up the offer or been, involved with it. We had a guy who was a real wrestler. Nick, as I mentioned, was trained by the greatest, Thez, Snyder, his dad, and all of the other wrestlers that he worked with. And he was the real wrestler that could use heel tactics. He was a consummate professional. He represented, as I pointed out earlier, he looked the role of a champion. He held the belt with dignity. He always had the sport coat on and the tie or the suit. And he just walked like a champion. And I think that's my biggest dig to the championships today, is that the guy looks like a bum. They're in overalls, they're in masks, they're in, whatever. They look like bums. They don't look like a champion. So Nick was the last, I think. And I think Harley Race was still good enough to do that. And Jack certainly was. But Nick was the champion that I feel was the best wrestler and the best heel at the same time.
All right.
So if I can, Mr. Young,
yes,
since Nikita had to go, would you care to make the argument as the author of The Wrestler's Wrestler to make the argument for Bruno?
I mean, I'll make an argument for Bruno, but it's going to be devil's advocate. Even though I'm a Northeastern guy, Bruno was third on my list. People are going to hate me for saying that, but I will make the argument for Bruno. Tell me when my minute's good to go.
You're good to go.
Bruno Sammartino represented the people. It wasn't about his technical ability. It wasn't about his wrestling prowess. It wasn't about his amateur abilities. It was about, I am a hero to the underdog. I am, for the downtrodden look up to me. The immigrants look up to me. I represent them. I'm fighting for them. He had such an emotional connection with that audience that, look, Larry Zbyszko told me to this day, he still gets the occasional death threat for turning on Bruno. That is a champion's champion. Maybe not a wrestler's wrestler, but Bruno was as important to the business as far as connecting with fans as anybody in the history of the business. That's where I will put Bruno on the hierarchy of the wrestlers.
Okay, terrific.
All right, that's the best I can do for Bruno, since I think Brisco and Bockwinkel were better workers. But
I think it would have been fun, guys, to see Bockwinkel wrestle Bruno. I think it would have been good to see Bockwinkel wrestle Brisco, and I think it would be great to see those. I just think those matches would have been classics, but it would be interesting to see how the fans went on it.
Mr. Young, since this is your baby, would you like to put a bow on things?
I will put a bow on things. First off, everybody needs to go out and get the books written by George and written by Nikita. Nikita's book, written with Scott Teal, When It Was Real. We will post the links in the description. Mr. George Schire, the great, the legendary, Minnesota's Golden Age of Wrestling, from Vern Gagne to the Road Warriors. Also, the AWA record book, the 1960s, and the AWA record books, 2 volumes of the 1970s. We will put links on here. Everyone should pick up these books. Search George Schire on YouTube. You will find a million podcasts, and they are all fantastic. And Rodney West, my Southern boy who came in to defend the NWA champ, can be seen weekly on the Pro Wrestling Inside and Out podcast, hosted by him and his brother and the Bombardier Jack Lord. Anybody in their show, they will talk contemporary wrestling, but also the history of the territories, especially Georgia, because that's where they're all from. But fantastic history. You guys are what make the history of this business still come to life. You guys represented wrestlers who were from an era where, as Nikita's book says, when it was real. People who made us believe. People we believed in and would watch because their sweat was our sweat, their blood was our blood. And as far as a winner to the debate goes, it's a 3-way tie. I don't know. I'm not picking a winner on here. Jonathan, you got a winner?
I will go 3-way tie, but if you put a gun in my head, I'd have to say George.
Yeah, I got your money.
Oh, George.
Wow.
Bockwinkel,
Maybe that's
you
just
made
the whiskey
case
talking.
for Nick. Sounds like you made the case for Nick.
I think everybody made great cases. As I said earlier, I've enjoyed this. It's been fun. And I do love Jack Brisco. I had the honor to sit twice with Jack Brisco at the bar at Cauliflower Alley and just talk wrestling. And what a fine gentleman he was. We talked about his title reign. We talked about his early training. We talked about his auto business. We talked about the deal with Vince McMahon when they sold out. And what a cool experience. So as far as I'm concerned, he was my friend too, but I didn't know him like I did Nick. And I unfortunately never had a chance to talk to Bruno.
And the Brisco Brothers Body Shop, it's worth the drive.
And I want to say I am so thrilled. Like I said, I'm geeking out on this. As a history nerd and as someone who loves the history of the business, just to be able to talk to the 4 of you, Jonathan included, of course, but Nikita and Rodney and George, to be able to speak with you and hear your insights and your takes on this, and just the knowledge and the passion you all have. And I also have to say, not only am I thrilled for this, but I am deeply humbled and honored that I'm able to call all 3 of you friend, and that means the world to me. And I just really appreciate you guys coming on. This was fantastic.
The Venmo payment is on its way.
I'd go the old-fashioned check route, and it's going to bounce.
It will bounce.
What are you, Paul Heyman?
I got a chance in an independent group years ago to be a heel manager, and that was fun. So,
oh boy. Well,
Jonathan,
gentlemen,
anything
thank
before
you.
we sign off?
The only thing I could say is thank you.
I hope we can do something again. Thank you, guys.
Well, Brian will put us in touch and we'll make it happen.
All
Absolutely. So,
Rodney, it was a pleasure meeting you, Jonathan, as well. And Brian, you and I have kind of chatted. So, and Nikita, it was great.
Yeah, I'll put you in touch with him too, and I'm sure we can make that happen.
All right. So if you guys stick around after we stop recording, but for now, we say to everyone out there, good night.
Meeting is adjourned. Oh, I am sorry, sir. I didn't mean to overstep my bounds. You say that.
What?
Meeting is adjourned.
It is?
No, you say that, Governor.
What?
Meeting is adjourned.
It is?
Hey there, Friday fans. We know how much you enjoy the movies. Enjoy grabbing your Friday merchandise and interacting with the Friday family, whether it be at conventions or during our particular watch-alongs. Well, when you're looking to get yourself masks, why not check out our friends over at Camp Blood Customs out of New York State and order your specific custom mask from any of the films. All orders are made specifically. Your needs and wants are. Make sure you find Camp Blood Customs on Facebook, Instagram, and all over social media and order yours today.
What's going on, world? This is Mark here, the world's strongest man, not in just one, not two, but three different sports. And I am on the crazy train.